太平洋の真ん中に位置するハワイ。今では観光名所として世界中からその自然とリゾートを楽しみに多くの人が訪れる有名なこの地であるが、過去には多くの人が亡くなった地でもある。
All right, I will start on the morning of December 7th, which is a Sunday morning, very early. My mother is making breakfast and we hear airplanes flying over our house. And so my father gets up and he says, how unusual for airplanes to fly on Sunday morning in Pearl Harbor. And then we start to hear some explosions and we go out into the front yard. So my father and I are standing in the front yard and we look up above the house and above the trees, and we see airplanes that are coming over, and they're very low. And we understand later, not right then, but understand that those are torpedo bombers. And the ships in Pearl Harbor are only a couple of 100 yards away from us, and that's where the airplanes are going. So my father picks me up, I'm 6 years old, and takes me in the house, and my mother and my baby brother is asleep in his bed, and he picks up my baby brother and my mother and he puts us in our car and we try to drive away from all the bombs that are falling and the airplanes that are flying over. And now there's big black smoke that's coming up from the airplanes, bombs that have hit the ships in the harbor. And my father puts us in the car to drive away from the bombing. When we are in our car, we see army trucks coming, rushing past us with soldiers in them. And we try to stay off the road to let the soldiers go by. And we drive our car and my father takes us up to the mountains above Pearl Harbor. And in the mountains there, we grow sugar cane, where we get sugar from. And that's where we go to hide and to get away from the bombs. So after we are in the sugarcane fields, more and more of our neighbors are coming to get away from the bombing and the attack. The attack lasts for 2 hours. And we can look down from the mountains and we can see the ships on fire, and we can see the big oily black smoke. We didn't know what was happening, so my father turns on the radio to get the news, and the news tells us that this is not a practice. This is an attack, and it's from Japan, and that we need to stay in our house and not to use the telephone, and military to go to their base, and medical people to go to the hospital. So we stay up in the sugarcane fields, and I want to go home. I left my dog, and this time it's now afternoon, and we're listening still to the car radio, and the governor comes on the car radio and tells us that President Roosevelt and the governor have talked, and that we are now under martial law, which means the military will be in charge of Hawaii. And again, military report to your bases, and medical report to treat the wounded and the injured, and all of the civilians do not use the phone and stay in your house. As it gets later in the afternoon, we all want to go home, but it's not safe for us. We cannot go back to our house. So we go to another town close by, and they make they have a hall reception building for us to stay in. There's about 100 of us from Pearl Harbor, and that's where we stay. And that night, when we're all sitting there in the dark, is when everybody starts to be afraid, because we don't know what's happening. We can't go home. The military is now in charge. And then after it gets dark, we can see that the harbor is like under attack again. And we find out not that night, which makes us scared because we think it's another Japanese attack. But I find out years later that it was friendly fire. It was our guns shooting our airplanes. I would like to tell you what happened to my Japanese neighbors, my Japanese American neighbors. They also came up to the sugarcane fields, but they were brought by Army soldiers, and they were kept separate. So the night of December 7th, when the rest of us got to go to another town and to sleep and be taken care of and to be fed, the Japanese Americans who were living in Pearl Harbor, which were my neighbors, they had to sleep outdoors in the sugarcane fields, and it rained that night. So that's a sad, lots of sad things happen with war, and that was sad. way that the Japanese Americans were treated. We did not get to come back to our house and for several days until all the unexploded bombs and everything was made safe, and then we could come back home. We had no school for 3 months. We went back to school in February, and we had to carry a gas mask with us to school. And at school, we had air raid practices to put on our gas mask and to go to the bomb shelters on the school playground. So now we have curfews. You cannot leave your house after dark, and there's no more movie theaters. There's everything stops, and you cannot have any lights on in your house. So my father took black paint and he painted the windows black so that we could turn on a small light in the house. And it was a scary time. You couldn't be out at night driving your car either, unless you had an important government job. And my father censored the mail, so he could drive the car at night. But you have to put black paint over almost all of your headlights so that it makes it very not bright. And then you can only drive 15 miles an hour. It was a scary time for everybody. Many of the women and children left Hawaii to go to the United States. So a lot of the women and children were leaving, and they would put them on ships, and those ships would go to California, let off the women and children, civilians, and then they would put Army and Navy and Marines and bring them back to Hawaii. So now Hawaii, you have very few natives, but you have mostly military everywhere you go. Hawaii depends on ships from all over the world and USA to bring everything to Hawaii. And so during World War II, we knew we weren't going to be getting supplies brought to Hawaii, because now the ships were bringing military men and not bringing food or clothes or school supplies. So everybody started growing their own food. And lucky in Hawaii, you can grow your food, but we didn't have any meat. So my father got a mother rabbit and a father rabbit, and we started raising rabbits so that we could have meat. But I fell in love with the rabbits and I wouldn't let him kill them. So we didn't have meat, but we could go to the ocean and get fish. And you may have wondered about my dog. Her name is Hula Girl because my mother was a hula teacher. And remember when we were up hiding in the sugarcane fields and I worried about her and I wanted to go home to get her, but the military wouldn't let us go. Well, when we finally got home, it was almost 4 to 5 days later. I went looking for her and I couldn't find her. And I got on my bicycle and I went and looked at her for her. And that night, when I was saying my prayers for bedtime, I heard her. And of course, she wasn't under the bed, but she was under the house. And so I did find her, and we had a very happy hug and kiss reunion. I'd like to share with you some of the stories of my Japanese American classmates and neighbors. For the most part, they were not taken away like the Japanese Americans in California and Oregon and the West Coast of the United States. Hawaii has a very large Japanese population, almost 1/3. So most of the Japanese were American, Hawaii American born, and a few of them did get taken. We had 2 camps on the island, the same island that Honolulu and Pearl Harbor is. Some were taken to those camps, but the majority of them, their life did not change as much as some of the leaders. I did have a classmate, his mother and father were both doctors and leaders in the community, and they were taken from Hawaii to a special camp in Texas. But the rest of, most of my classmates didn't suffer like the ones in California and the West Coast of the United States. So the war goes on for 4 long years. It's a long time. It's the war that killed 60 million people, and the ones who suffer as much, and there's more who are killed, are the women, the children, and the civilians. I know we've just recently had an anniversary of August the 6th, and then moving to September the 2nd, when the peace treaty was signed in Tokyo Bay. But then on August the 14th or 15th, depending what side of the date line you're on, I remember that day so well because my mother was having a hula class. She was a teacher, and we got the news that Japan had surrendered, and President Truman had announced the end of the war, and all the ships in the harbor were shooting streams of lights, and water boats were spraying water, and everybody was hugging and kissing each other. And it was finally such a time of both sadness and gladness that the war was finally over. It makes me feel very happy to connect Pearl Harbor and Nagasaki, and to talk about ways our world so needs peace. And if we can continue to talk to each other, I think the right words can bring peace to us.
真珠湾攻撃を体験された方で、まだ生きてらっしゃる方って何人ぐらいいるかっていうのと、ドリンダさんの体験を次の世代に伝えてくれる若者はいますかっていう。
It's hard to know. Of the Pearl Harbor survivors, there's very few because this happened 80 years ago. So that means I'm 86 and I was little. So the men who were on the ships, if they were at least 20, say, they would be 100 minimum. And so there are very few that are still alive because of the amount of time that has gone by.
That's
so
true.
pretty much going to be the children who are alive at the time to tell the story. Sort of the same thing with you with your Nagasaki stories. They will be your grandparents, and so it is up to you to tell their stories.
So,
In my book, Pearl Harbor Child is one way. Talking to students like you is another way. And I wish she was my agent. I appreciate her comments.
私はやっぱり世界平和を訴える一人の高校生として日本の被害の面だけではなくて加害の面も学ぶべきだと自分自身すごく思っているのですが、そういうドリーナさんはそういう過去の戦争において被害の面だけではなくて加害の面を学ぶことにどのような意味があると思っていますか？
I think we need to have the studies of what both countries did. I think it's as important for Japan students to know about Pearl Harbor as it is for American students to know about Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and not hide any of it. It's what happened. And the important thing is, what do we do now about that so it doesn't happen again? And I'd like to tell your students their pursuit of peace will serve them as nothing else will in their life, and continue to learn and to study. And I wish you much aloha.